Picture this. You are alone. The world has been stolen from you, bleached into an endless, biting canvas of white. Snow doesn't fall. It shrieks, a horizontal tempest that erases the sky, the mountains, the very ground beneath your feet. Your horse is gone, swallowed by the blizzard hours ago. Your husband is gone, swallowed by the earth weeks ago. All you have left is the fierce, desperate life kicking inside you, a life that has chosen this exact moment, this howling vortex of ice and despair, to be born. Every contraction is a hot spike of agony against the freezing wind that claws through your threadbare coat. You fall to your knees, a small, dark shape in a universe of blinding white, and you scream a prayer to a god you're no longer sure is listening. The cold is a predator, sinking its teeth into your bones. This is the end. A grave of snow for you and the child you never got to hold. But then, through the deafening roar of the storm, a shape emerges. A silhouette, tall and broad, moving with a purpose that seems to defy the hurricane of wind and ice. It is a man, dark as a shadow against the stark whiteness, his face obscured by a low-brimmed hat and a thick scarf. He stops before you, a titan forged from winter itself. You see nothing but his eyes, chips of flint that seem to hold the sorrow of 1,000 lonely nights. He doesn't speak. He simply kneels, his movements economical and sure. With hands that are surprisingly gentle, he lifts you from the snow, your body a dead weight in his powerful arms. The world spins into a vortex of white and black, pain and a sliver of impossible hope, and then only darkness. You awaken to the scent of pine smoke and stew. The roar of the storm is now a muffled complaint outside the sturdy log walls of a small cabin. A fire crackles in a stone hearth, casting a warm, flickering glow across the room. You are tucked under a thick bearskin pelt, the chill chased from your limbs. Another contraction rips through you, and you cry out. The man is there in an instant, moving from the hearth to your side. He pulls the scarf from his face, and you see him clearly for the first time. He is a man carved from hardship. A deep scar runs from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, pulling his lip into a permanent, somber line. His face is a landscape of sun-weathered lines and quiet grief, but his eyes, though haunted, hold no malice. They hold a profound, weary competence. The babe's coming. You gasp, shame and fear warring within you. He simply nods, his expression unreadable. I know, he says, his voice a low rumble, like stones shifting deep underground. This is Silas, a man who lives at the edge of the world because he has been banished from its center. A gunslinger, a ghost, a name whispered with fear in the towns below this unforgiving mountain. But in this moment, he is none of those things. He is just a man, faced with the raw, terrifying miracle of birth. For the next few hours, the cabin becomes a sanctuary sealed against the world's fury. Silas, whose hands were made for the cold steel of a revolver, proves to be impossibly steady. He boils water. He tears strips of clean linen. He speaks to you in that low, calming voice, not with empty platitudes, but with quiet, direct instructions that anchor you to the moment. He is the only solid thing in a world that has dissolved into pain. And as the storm reaches its zenith, its shrieks rattling the very bones of the cabin, you give one final, desperate push. A new sound joins the tempest, the thin, powerful cry of a newborn child. Silas wraps the baby in a soft cloth and places her on your chest. A daughter. Through a haze of exhaustion and tears, you look at him, this fearsome stranger who just saved 2 lives. A single tear traces a clean path through the grime on his cheek. For the first time, the flint in his eyes softens, revealing the man buried beneath the legend. He had seen death 100 times, had even delivered it. But life? This was a language he had long forgotten how to speak. The blizzard raged for another week, imprisoning the unlikely trio in their fortress of logs and warmth. The world outside was a blank page, but inside the cabin, a new story was being written, one word at a time. You named the baby Hope, a name that felt both like a prayer and a defiant declaration. Alara. That was your name. a name you hadn't felt worthy of until this small, perfect child was in your arms. In the quiet days that followed, the silence between you and Silas slowly began to fill with words. You told him of your husband, David, a good and honest farmer whose only crime was owning a stretch of land with a river running through it, a river that the corrupt mayor of Dusty Redemption, a man named Jedediah Blackwood, coveted for his cattle empire. David had refused to sell. He believed in the law, in fairness. A week later, he was dead, crushed in a freak cattle stampede that everyone in town knew was no accident. With Blackwood's men watching your every move, you had fled under the cover of night, with nothing but a horse and the child in your womb, running toward a distant territory where you hoped the law was more than just a rich man's cudgel. Silas listened, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth, his jaw tight. The story was a familiar one to him, the powerful preying on the weak, justice sold to the highest bidder. When it was his turn, his story came out in broken fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror. He had once been Marshal Silas Kane, a man who wore a star and believed in it. He'd had a wife, a son. They lived in a small house on the prairie. He was hunting the McAllister gang, ruthless outlaws who burned and pillaged their way across the territory. While he was away, they came for his family. Not for revenge, but for the sheer, cruel sport of it. They burned his home to the ground with his wife and son inside. He returned to smoke and silence. The star on his chest felt like a brand of failure. He hunted the McAllisters down, not for justice, but for a vengeance so cold and absolute it hollowed him out, leaving behind the scarred, silent shell of a man. He had buried Silas Kane with his family and wandered into the mountains, a ghost content to be forgotten. A fragile routine took root in the small cabin. It was a silent dance of shared existence. Silas would hunt, returning with fresh game that you would cook, filling the small space with aromas that spoke of life and sustenance. He would sit for hours by the fire, carving a small, intricate wooden bird for hope, his large, calloused hands moving with an artist's delicacy. You would mend the tears in his worn coat, your stitches weaving a silent story of gratitude and care. You saw him watching you with hope, a look of profound, aching sorrow in his eyes, the ghost of a father watching a life he could never have again. He saw you looking at the empty holster on his belt, the fear and respect mingling in your gaze. One afternoon, he took you outside, the snow now crisp and glittering under a pale sun. He taught you how to read the tracks in the snow, how to tell a deer from a wolf, how to know which way the wind would carry your scent. The wild doesn't care if you're good or bad, he said, his breath misting in the cold air. It only cares if you're smart. If you pay attention, it was the most he had said at one time, a lesson in survival that was also a lesson in his own philosophy. You were no longer just a frightened widow. You were a mother, and you were learning to be a survivor. The cabin, once his refuge of lonely penitence, was slowly, imperceptibly, becoming a home. The hole in his soul, a wound he thought was fatal, was beginning to feel the warmth of a fire he never thought he'd sit by again. The future was a terrifying, unwritten wilderness, but for the first time in a long time, neither of you felt entirely alone in it. The thaw came as it always does. Water dripped from the eaves of the cabin, a gentle percussion that sounded like a countdown. The world was returning, and with it the dangers you had fled. One morning, Silas, standing at the edge of the woods, went still. His eyes, trained by years of hunting men, narrowed on a distant rider, a speck moving along the valley floor below. The rider paused, looking up toward the thin plume of smoke rising from their chimney, a beacon that had once meant survival and now signaled discovery. Silas said nothing when he came back inside, but the air in the cabin grew heavy and cold. The peace was over. 2 days later they came. 3 men on horseback, led by a man in a fine black coat and a bowler hat, his face fleshy and smug with unearned authority. It was Mayor Blackwood. He dismounted, his boots sinking into the mud, a predatory smile spreading across his face as he saw you standing in the doorway, holding hope. "Well, well, Alara," he said, his voice slick with false sympathy. "We were all so worried about you. Lost in the storm, we thought. It's a miracle you survived. His eyes flickered past you, into the cabin, landing on Silas, who stood near the hearth, as still and silent as a mountain cat. Blackwood's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He didn't recognize the man, but he recognized the type. Dangerous. The good people of redemption are ready to welcome you home, Blackwood continued, his gaze returning to you, possessive and cruel. Your land is being looked after. Of course, with David gone, the deed is complicated. But you and the child will be taken care of. Under my protection, the threat was clear. You, your child, your land, he saw it all as his property. She's not going anywhere. Silas's voice cut through the air, low and lethal. Blackwood turned his full attention to the scarred man. He sized him up, the worn gun belt, the haunted eyes. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps just arrogant dismissal, crossed his face. And who are you? Her new watchdog. One of Blackwood's hired guns snickered. Silas took a slow step forward, out of the shadows and into the stark morning light. I'm the man telling you to get on your horse and ride away. Blackwood's face hardened. His hand drifted toward the pistol at his own hip. I hold the deed to that woman's land. That's the law. That's not law, Silas said, his voice dropping even lower. That's theft. And I've seen enough of it. The name came to Blackwood then. A ghost story told in saloons. The unkillable lawman who cleaned out the McAllister gang. Wait, you're Kane. Marshall Kane. They said you were dead. A cruel smile touched Silas's scarred lip. I was, he said. He looked at you, at the baby cradled in your arms. A fire ignited in his eyes, a fire you had never seen before. Not the cold fire of vengeance, but the hot, righteous flame of protection. But I got better in that moment. The world slowed. Blackwood's hand moved, but Silas was a force of nature. His draw was not a movement but a conclusion, a blur of motion that ended with his revolver leveled, steady and sure. A single shot echoed through the valley, not aimed at Blackwood, but at the pistol being drawn by the man beside him. The gun clattered to the mud. The second man froze, his hand hovering over his own weapon. Don't, Silas commanded, and the word held the weight of a dozen graves. Blackwood stared, his bravado melting into disbelief and fear. He saw it now. This wasn't some broken-down hermit. This was a legend reborn, and that legend was standing between him and everything he wanted. Defeated, not by a bullet, but by a resolve he could not comprehend, Blackwood backed away. He saw the truth in Silas's eyes. This man would die on this patch of mud before he let them take one more step. Without another word, the mayor and his men mounted their horses and retreated down the mountain, their power broken by the courage of one man who had rediscovered something worth fighting for. The silence they left behind was vast and profound, filled only by the sound of the dripping water and Hope's soft breathing. The sun broke fully through the clouds, bathing the small cabin in a brilliant, cleansing light. You looked at Silas, at the gun still held loosely in his hand, and you no longer saw a gunslinger. You saw a guardian. You saw the wall that stood between your child and a cruel world. He slowly holstered his weapon, the sound clicking into place like the final word of a long chapter. He turned to you, and his eyes, once haunted by the ghosts of the family he'd lost, now held the reflection of the family he had found. He had stepped out of his own grave and into the light. The cabin was no longer a hideout. It was a foundation. The mountain was no longer a prison. It was a sanctuary. Together, you three, the widow, the gunslinger, and the child named Hope, were a new kind of family, forged not by blood, but by the fire of adversity and the unbreakable bonds of grace. What truly makes a family? Is it the people we are born to, or the people we would die for? How many times in our own lives do we find our greatest strength in the heart of our deepest vulnerability? The world can be a cold and unforgiving wilderness, but sometimes a single act of courage, a single moment of connection, can build a home in the most desolate of places. A man who thought his life was over found a new beginning in the cry of a newborn child. A woman who had lost everything found the strength to survive in the eyes of a stranger. They remind us that redemption is not about erasing the past, but about building a future worthy of its lessons. If this story of an unlikely family and the dawn of a new hope resonated with your spirit, please share your thoughts in the comments below. What does the word home mean to you? We would love to hear your story. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more tales that celebrate the enduring power of human connection.